The Johnny Depp defamation trial featured two established celebrities, a bona fide A-lister and his coattail riding cluster B ex-wife, who kept herself relevant through engineering his destruction. However, the breakout star of the trial was unquestionably Depp's lawyer Camille Vasquez. Tasking a woman to do the cross-examination of Amber Heard wasn't stunning and brave. It was a complete no-brainer, as it would have been impossible for any man to do the hard questioning without falling into the ready-made narrative tropes of men berating women, not believing the victim, re-victimizing, mansplaining. Hell, they might even work in a little manspreading at the plaintiff's table. In any case, it has nothing to do with who can uncover truth, as truth is not gendered, and everything to do with what shitty marketing people call optics, where what is has far less importance than how it looks. Vasquez was a very effective advocate for her client, Johnny Depp, often beginning a series of questions to Amber Heard by going right for the jugular, saying aloud what anyone with a lick of sense who wasn't ideologically obsessed already knew. Amber Heard was lying. Not only was she lying about having been abused, but her false accusations were just a proxy continuation of her being the one and only abuser in that relationship. At times, Vasquez even transcended lawyerly acting and expressed true anger and contempt towards Amber Heard and her lies. Anger and contempt that no man, least of all Johnny Depp, could have expressed.
Your lies have been exposed to the world multiple times, right?
I haven't lied about anything I've been here to say.
Camille Vasquez called Amber Heard a liar to her face. Vasquez pointed out how many times Heard claimed to have been pummeled by Johnny Depp and his meat tenderizer rings, yet looked picture perfect the next day when photographed at some event. Vasquez revealed that Heard's much publicized philanthropy actually hinged on semantics to hide her stiffing the ACLU and some sick kids. Heard shows why maintaining due process is essential, in that she finally found herself in a forum where she couldn't spout utter bullshit and expect everyone to be too polite, too worried about access, or too indoctrinated to question it. Vasquez was highly effective in raising objections to prevent Heard's many flavors of hearsay being offered as unvarnished truth. The jury found that not only were Heard's claims lies, but purposeful, malicious lies. People, being people, almost immediately cheapened the significance of Camille Vasquez by shipping her and Johnny Depp. I had no idea what shipping was, and only finding out it was derived from the word relationship could make the whole thing sound stupider than it already did. The people were explaining that support and defense shown towards Johnny Depp could only be explained by a romantic relationship between them. But their relationship is far deeper and more meaningful than that. Johnny Depp is someone who was run through the ringer. All his wealth and fame was not enough to protect him from false accusations and being railroaded through trial by media. Maybe we can give an ever so slight eye roll when he claimed he lost everything as a result of Amber Heard's lies, but that would depend on how central you believe a man's reputation should be to him. He needed Camille Vasquez, a woman, to step forward to be his sword and shield, as men are unable to defend themselves against women, both figuratively and literally. On the literal side, here is a clip from the Lapif network, which predates the trial by about a year. The argument made is a bit twisted and diffuse because the women won't come right out and say it. But the upshot is their belief that regardless of how a woman physically assaults a man, it is up to the man to ensure that, even in restraining her, no harm comes to the woman. Just because a woman is punching you in the face, they say, doesn't mean she should face any consequences as a result. A woman's physical abuse should be treated like her false accusations. If it doesn't work, no harm, no foul, better luck next time, and we all move along like it never happened. At some point, one of these women, Kay, suggests that the man employ a bear hug to stop a woman landing blows on him.
The interesting thing about it is that they will spend 99.9% of their time trying to get you to figure out how to be more reactive instead of solving the problem, which is you should not put your hands on a man.
That was the
You
first
don't
thing
even-
everyone
you
said.
don't even get into this situation if y'all need to spend more time having conversations with women and saying, hey, you're not equal to a man, you're not as strong as a man, keep your hands off of him, and you won't find yourself in a position where he got to try to restrain you.
Oh my
We're not even having this conversation.
What is?
Here,
Oh my God!
I agree.
He's
Let me
1,000%
tell you.
right.
Hold on.
Okay, we got a guest on. We got a guest. We got a guest on. We can do this after hours.
As to where it's going.
No, I mean, seriously. Do you think the men in your family were taught how to treat women?
Yes.
Okay, they were. Were they taught how to protect themselves from women?
Yes.
In what way?
Just not even getting into certain situations, especially as Black men, knowing certain things that could happen, things like that. Do you think it's okay if you as a man were not hurt? And I would never do it, so I'm not trying to advocate for people hitting, but I'm just saying hypothetically, if a woman that was small hit you, do you think you should hit her back even though you weren't hurt?
I absolutely think I should have the right to hit that lady back. No,
Even if
no,
you weren't hurt?
absolutely. It
Why?
cannot be the case that some 5'3" woman gets to run around and hit every 6-foot man. Like, what world are you living in? Just
Right.
because you
Well,
can't
I'm
hurt,
asking you the question.
Just because a woman is 5'3" and can't hurt a man over 6 foot means that she just gets to walk around and hit every single man willy-nilly?
No.
Well, there you go.
So okay, so are you saying that it's men's duty to teach
Jesus
the
Christ, who
woman-
said the word duty? Are you? Come on,
I'm
Kay.
asking
crazy.
Listen, Kay.
I'm
This is
asking
I'm starting to see what people are talking about.
I'm
No
asking
one said
you.
the word duty but you. Like, you're putting words in my mouth.
I'm not.
I
I'm
said what I
asking
said.
you. I'm asking you. Do you
Well,
think,
well, if you ask me then, but don't put words in my mouth
I'm
when you
not.
ask me.
I said, do you think that it's a man's duty to put like a smaller woman in her place if she tries to hit him?
No.
It's her duty to keep her hands to herself.
Hold
I agree with that.
on, wait, because I don't want Kay to misunderstand what the lead was saying. Kay, the way you started with the question, you said, "Are you saying that it's a man's duty?"
Right.
Exactly, Rilla.
So that's a different question. That's why he was saying, "Don't put words in my mouth."
Thank you, Rilla.
That's a different way of asking. So
Are you
you're saying,
Like, really, and I
say
are
no
actually
or yes?
listening to the words that are coming out of your mouth, even if you're not listening to them. Like, I
Yes.
get very offended when people put words in my mouth because
Oh,
choose my
me
words.
too.
I choose my words precisely.
I feel you. I wasn't trying to put words in your mouth. I was saying, what do you think about that? Is
A
what I'm
man
asking.
should have the duty to make sure that he is protected at all times, and should allow no one to just walk around willy-nilly hitting him, whether or not he feels subjectively or objectively that person can or cannot hurt him.
Hey, Lead, I have a
Okay.
question. I have a
Oh.
question. So let's just take the dynamics of you and Kay. And Kay's 5'3", you're 6'3", a whole foot, and she hits you. And you're like, well, you hit me, I should be able to hit you back. What about an alternative? And I'm just asking, of a restraint, since you're bigger, and grabbing her app and calling the police and saying she's right now hitting me, come here and arrest her for assault, and having it legally on the books that she hits men.
Yeah.
First of all, well, I'll take your second point first. First of all, no one cares that women hit men. When you say legally on the books that she hits men, no one cares. She's not going to get punished for that. So that's not a deterrent at all. Second of all, if I restrain her, if I grab her wrist, there's going to be a mark. So guess what? We're both going to jail.
Oh, you're
right?
super
So
strong.
I am protecting myself, restraining her, doing what you say I should do. And then when the cops show up and see my fingerprints on her wrist, we're both going.
But
And
it's
that's
the
the
flip
best case
side.
scenario, because
So
what
then
she
what
could.
should you do?
But hold on, Kay, let him finish. Go ahead, Lead.
What I'm saying is your solution is the best case scenario. What
Okay.
happens a lot of times is I could restrain her, the cops show up, They see bruises on her wrist, but they don't see any bruises on me. So now she's free and I'm going to jail.
Right.
And these same cops have probably been raised, especially down here in Georgia, under the assumption that men don't hit women regardless.
Yeah.
That's why it's all messed up on all different levels.
Well, let me ask you this, because you're restraining, you know, you're talking about holding the wrist. Restraining could be a bear hug and telling her, you know what I'm saying?
Are you serious?
Why are you guys breaking down?
Y'all gotta let me finish.
The bear hug thing threw me off.
Not let me talk. That was just
But the man is gonna protect. They're gonna protect themselves. If the woman out of control, they're gonna protect themselves. In the story.
Okay, please stop and let me talk.
All right, talk to me about the bear hug.
Okay, so I'm not even. That's just an idea.
No. Listen, you got mad because I cut you off at the bear hug. So fine, finish your point about the bear hug. I'm sorry I cut you off at the bear hug.
I'm trying to finish a sentence. So even with that, but if you hit her, being that you're a foot taller, you don't think that's going to be an imprint more than trying to constrain her, than fight her? And if she doesn't get anything on her, well, no, you don't get anything on her because she's not strong enough to do any kind of bruise on you, but you're able to bruise her when you fight her, and the police come, who getting arrested? The police, when they come, they're looking at who is more messed up.
The bear hug should be familiar to anyone who actually watched the Johnny Depp defamation trial. In what has come to be called the staircase incident, Amber Heard went off on Johnny Depp, as she tended to do, raining blows on the back of his head. On the stand, Depp acted out his response, which was to turn, ducking under Heard's fists and putting her in a bear hug, exactly what the women on the LaPeef stream said a man should do. The problem was, as the aggressor, Amber Heard was not completely cooperative, and by thrashing around, her head connected with Depp's. This was immediately turned into her claim that Depp headbutted her. In the aftermath, Heard emerged from a bathroom claiming that Johnny Depp had broken her nose, showing him a red-stained tissue. A stain that Depp, on retrieving that tissue from the trash, realized was red nail polish. Not only did this show that Heard, based on her testimony, has more false positive broken noses than anyone has any right to, but how quickly she was able to recast her own violent behavior into victimhood. Why it is impossible for a man to defend himself against a woman's violence, why anything he does casts him in the role of perpetrator, is nicely exemplified by the testimony of Heard's expert witness, psychologist Dawn Hughes. The totality of her testimony depicted domestic violence as an entirely gendered phenomena. That is, she interprets everything according to the Duluth model, which invariably genders the recipient of abuse as her and the abuser as him. The very structure and language of the Duluth model makes the idea of a female perpetrator conceptually impossible by employing exactly the sort of gendered language we are not supposed to use. Regardless of who did what to whom, men are to blame for doing too little, doing too much, or doing anything at all. And that's a very, very bad place for a man to be in, especially since much of the training of law enforcement and the attitudes of the court are directly informed by the mind virus of the Duluth model. And that not only allows women who are abusive to abuse men by conventional means, but also engage in what psychologist Shannon Curry describes as administrative violence, which is using law enforcement and the court system as another means for women to abuse men, essentially abuse by proxy.
What did you learn about Ms. Heard from the results of the MMPI-2?
Quite a bit. I wrote up a 25-page interpretation outline. It has numerous scales. So one of the reasons I like this measure so much is that it can tell you so much about multiple different traits and tendencies and mental issues. One of the primary things I learned was that she had a very sophisticated way of minimizing any personal problems. I also learned that she tends to, well, there were a number of characteristics that were consistent with the eventual diagnoses, but some of the primary characteristics, and I'm going to try to condense 25 pages here, were essentially externalization of blame, tending to have a lot of inner hostility that is attempted to be controlled, a tendency to be very self-righteous, but to also deny that self-righteousness and to judge others critically against these sort of high standards for moral value, but also to deny doing that, essentially to claim that one is very non-judgmental and accepting and yet very full of rage, really. With borderline personality disorder, you're having these fluctuating moods constantly. And again, this hypersensitivity to being slighted or feeling offended, really driven by the fear that if you're offended or slighted, if the therapist comes in 2 minutes late, or if somebody shows up to dinner 2 minutes late, that they might be abandoning you. And it's not as if the borderline is considering themselves abandoned in that moment, but they just know that they have this overwhelming emotion, and there are no attempts to control that emotion. There are no attempts to regulate it. So if they're in the middle of the restaurant and they feel offended, they're going to start the fight. People are going to see it, or they might just start crying or break down, but they'll make a lot of accusations, and that reactivity is when you're going to see a lot of this escalation in the bizarre behavior. They can react violently, they can react aggressively, they will often physically prevent their partner from trying to leave if their partner wants to get space from all of this intense emotion, and oftentimes they will be abusive to their partners in these situations. Sometimes they'll physically restrain them from leaving and become injured that way, but also people with borderline personality disorder, it seems to be a predictive factor for women who implement violence against their partner. And one of the most common tactics that they'll use is actually physically assaulting and then getting harmed themselves. But mostly, we call this administrative violence. So essentially, this is saying that they'll make threats using the legal system. So they might say that they are going to file a restraining order or claim abuse, or they might do these things to essentially try to keep their partner from leaving. In the moment, again, they're not consciously thinking, I'm going to keep my partner from leaving right now. They're just thinking, I can't stand this. I hate my partner. They went from idealizing to suddenly devaluing because of the hurt, and they'll do anything to express that big emotion of anger.
Amber Heard has 2 diagnosed personality disorders that not only inform her perception of reality, but shape her behavior in response to those perceptions. One of the great mysteries to anyone who has been on the receiving end of a borderline personality's bottomless fun bag of vindictiveness is how anyone can operate as tirelessly with such single-minded purpose as a psycho woman filtering reality through her cracked lens. Borderlines are the long-distance endurance hunters of toxic behavior. As someone who has previously dealt with a person who I lovingly refer to as my psycho ex-girlfriend, and as someone who is fairly certain my former supervisor at Commerce was happily camping on Cluster B land, it doesn't make any sense to ask why some people behave in that way, as they're not making any sense is the point. To them, vindictiveness is its own end. You might as well claim Jack the Ripper didn't do what he did because strangling and eviscerating a series of alcoholic prostitutes living on the margins of society doesn't make any sense either. Unless you can accept the fact that some people are just fucked in the head. And borderline personality women, and 75% of all diagnosed borderlines are women, are simply serial killers of the soul. I have known men who were abused, and being in the middle of that maelstrom doesn't make it any more intelligible. All you are aware of is the confusing swirl of chaos rotating around you. You aren't so much interested in what constitutes the debris or where it came from, as in not getting impaled by it. I knew a big guy, 6'4", whose wife used to bite him. Not only did she leave crescent-shaped bruises all over him, but knowing exactly who had the power and control in this situation, she would mock him, tell him to call the police and see who they would believe, much as Amber Heard did. And you know exactly what happens next. When he finally had enough of her psychological and physical abuse, he did call the police, and yes, he was the one arrested. Perhaps because some of him was abusively stuck in her teeth. The Duluth model makes much of the idea of power and control. In fact, it's literally its central concept, the hub of its wheel. What it seems entirely blind to is the idea that much power and control can be gained by adopting the camouflage of victim, even when one is the perpetrator. A guise that women like Amber Heard continue to adopt with the aid of the mainstream media and others who didn't actually bother to watch the trial, and if they did, had ideological blinders on. It seems willful ignorance is necessary to maintain their position. I would need several more hands to count the number of men who have been told by authorities that the woman attacking them better not break a nail, or they, the man under attack, will be arrested. By now, it's almost a cliche that men are arrested for domestic violence when a woman has bruises or abrasions on her wrists, which should make you wonder exactly what sort of strategy is being used in attacking someone's wrists. Obviously, like the bear hug headbutt, these wrists represent a defensive move that wasn't quite successful in leaving the perpetrator unscathed. What persists after the Johnny Depp trial, where a jury found Amber Heard's claims of abuse not only false, but malicious, is the conviction among those classes who tell us what to think, that he must have done something. That simply because he demonstrably did none of the things he was accused of doing doesn't serve to raise him to the level of being innocent. He must, so it is claimed, have had it coming. Even if that something was an unkind word or looking at her funny after she tossed something at his head, which shows the gendered nature of these views, in that a side eye is enough to justify a woman busting a man in the chops, but this is untrue should the genders be reversed. Usually this is justified by the claim that as men are physically bigger and stronger, it's then assumed that women could do them no physical harm. Why this is the case is never explained. The assumption is simply pulled ready-made from the ether. An assumption that no one making this claim seems to have put to the test by letting a 90-pound woman punch them in the face, as easy as this might be to arrange. Not only do men find it nearly impossible to defend themselves against physical abuse and administrative abuse using law enforcement and the courts as proxies, but against the abuse of false accusations played out in public opinion and through trial by media. Whenever the subject of false accusations are raised, people almost reflexively opine that the real victims of false accusations are women who have been legitimately abused, as the shadow of the false accusations revealed makes it more difficult for them to come forward. Which is curious, as almost no thought is given to the most immediate victim of false accusations, which are, of course, those men who are falsely accused. Not only that, but I've found that even raising this, which should be obvious, raises a certain amount of ire. Then you realize they are playing a zero-sum game where granting any empathy to men is thought to be at the expense of women, as if the Duluth model is to be applied to everything, including compassion. You may have noticed how representation in advocacy for men works, in that men are not listened to should they advocate for themselves. High-profile advocates for men are invariably women, because they have to be. All you need to do is look at effective advocates for men's issues, such as Karen Strahan, who entered the YouTube fray as Girl Rights Watt, members of the Honey Badger Brigade, such as Allison Tiemann and Hannah Wallen, who work tirelessly on the issues surrounding domestic and custodial abuse of men, or Diana Davison, whose Lighthouse Project speaks for men who have been falsely accused. The only reason why Cassie Jaye was able to make The Red Pill, her documentary on men's rights, is because she went into the project as a feminist looking to go into the belly of the misogynistic beast and get the dirt on them, and then fell down into the rabbit hole when she started listening to men and had the self-awareness to recognize her own biases towards men when interpreting their experiences, beginning with her feeling the need to change the subject whenever the subject of men's issues came up. The average discussion of men's issues lasts less than 5 minutes before the all-important question, "What about women?" comes up. The necessity of women being at the forefront of men's advocacy even holds true for Jennifer Molesky and Roma Army, regardless of whether or not you consider them to be obvious chameleons, otherwise woke types posing as men's rights advocates as their grift, which is almost certainly true of the latter funneling her fandom to what must be the most horrifying OnlyFans ever. Men who step forward to make the case for men are subject to endless uncharitable interpretations, as has happened to Paul Elam, who has been demonized for engaging in the mental exercise of imagining genders were swapped in the case of partner violence, because you must be an absolute pig if you don't think the girls at Jezebel having a laugh at slapping their boyfriends around isn't okay. And even someone as soft-spoken and conciliatory as Warren Farrow has been faced with attacks of berserker protesters determined to shut him down.
We're not super interested in talking to you, first of all, but basically we're here to shut down an event that is promoting the patriarchy.
You're doing it really well. Good job.
This is what men's rights look like. This is what men's rights look like. This is what men's rights look like. This is what men's rights.
Yeah, God, you're fucking dumb. Fuck you. They're fucking pigs. How do you sleep at night, man?
You should be fucking ashamed of yourself. You're fucking scum. You are fucking scum. Fucking rape apologist, incest supporting, woman hating, fucking scum.
Is there someone else I can wait? Does someone follow me?
Fucking scum. Yeah, just another.
I just want to listen to someone else's opinion. I'm not even on a side here. I just listen to as many people as I can.
You know what though? Why would you pay money to fucking support a fucking rape apologist if you weren't fucking one?
I never heard him say anything that was.
Well, it's fucking scum.
What makes Camille Vasquez important is her absolute necessity, as necessary as all the women previously mentioned, because she does what only a she can do, advocate for men. She managed to do so in a personable and professional way that made the insistence that facts really do matter almost respectable, with very little pushback save the random pick-me-girl accusation from some gender-swapped Lord Farquaad. The high visibility of the trial has, to some extent, raised the question of how we address the problem of domestic abuse of men, and of subjecting him to derision, scorn, and personal destruction through false accusations. But not nearly enough. Knowing the conversation is there to be had is not the same thing as having it. That's because it's not telling anyone anything they don't already know and don't already ignore. And what they ignore is male victims of abuse, including false accusations. To some extent, the difference is not the actor, but the stage they are acting on. But Vasquez succeeded in doing what she did in a girl boss fashion without being treated as a sellout, a traitor to female in-group preference. If the Duluth model treats slights and unkind words as abuse for power and control, then how should it characterize a premeditated campaign of reputation destruction through malicious lies? When that woman in Toronto accused Warren Farrow of being a rape apologist, simply saying she is mistaken is to give her too much credit. That is a lie, and she knows exactly what she's doing. There is no way one can characterize Warren Farrell's discussion of token resistance with making excuses for rape. Token resistance is familiar to anyone who's ever read a romance novel where a woman isn't saying no, but does offer just enough resistance to allow her to escape responsibility for initiating anything. If there's one thing that these sort of abusers know how to do, it is how to frame their lies to fit the pre-existing narrative. Almost as hard as admitting that some women can be abusive is acknowledging that the abuse is in no way a creative endeavor. Rather, it follows a long-established and well-worn playbook. The narratives and the channels through which it can be disseminated are already there, and all a liar, a false accuser, need to do is tailor their lies to fit. There is no such framework for the falsely accused. Are they protesting too little? Protesting too much? And where adherence to a narrative, the narrative itself, is more important than the facts, does it really make any difference? Once again, it comes down to the shitty alternative reality of optics. You know just how endlessly people can talk about the need for men to step up to do something or other, but in this case it is women, and only women, who can step up to make the case that facts do matter, that responsibility, blame, and innocence are not gendered concepts, that women must affirm the basic fairness of due process, undoing what many women's groups have done to dilute the concept in media and the courts. Camille Vasquez's performance in the trial goes a long way towards mainstreaming, to use another shitty term, the idea that women are empowered when they do the right thing, stand for the innocent, and give the guilty a really hard time. Empowerment should not be a matter of women simply getting what they want when they want it by any means which they can get it. You may notice that what this requires is dropping the gendered idea of sin and virtue built into the Duluth model and asking women to do what any person should do for another person. In becoming the sword and shield for a man, as Camille Vasquez did, women will have to give up using gender itself as a sword and a shield. In all the talk of Vasquez either being lauded as a girl boss or derided as a pick-me girl, her gender has everything to do with it, even though her gender should have nothing to do with it. That only a woman can do what any person should be able to do might tell us something about ourselves we may prefer not to know. But we have to recognize and encourage all the women, Vasquez and those previously mentioned, who step up and defend men. We know we should just treat people according to their deserts, treat facts as something knowable, and someone's unlikely stealth broken noses with the derision it deserves. Don't even bring gender into it, just like you aren't supposed to, especially when you find doing so convenient to your narrative. Except, with the way things are, you can't help but bring gender into it. You're not allowed to not do it. Gender doesn't determine guilt or innocence, even when we recognize regressive constructs that demand this to be the case. Whether or not it is fair and just that only women can be advocates for men doesn't change the facts of the matter. All that it takes is a person standing up for truth and due process, and it is both unjust and justice served that only these women can slay the dragons that men cannot slay themselves. It's not fair. It's not gender neutral. It's not just. It's just the way it is. Like what I'm doing here? Want to keep me from falling into abject poverty? Then consider supporting the channel and its author on Patreon. Or for a quick injection of cash into my dire circumstances, donate through PayPal. Both are linked in the description box below.